Hello, everyone. Welcome. I hope you had a great day. I hope your classrooms weren't too hot or too cold, and that your students were just everything you need them to be. My name is Cheryl Babin, and I'm thankful that you would join me for part 3 of our 3-part series around teaching new science curriculum to your kindergarten and grade 1 students. I'm excited to talk about how we might make connections with other subjects today. And hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at the other parts of the series. The recordings have all been shared out. If not, that's okay. We will make links, but it's just fine to be able to see things out of order, so to speak. So thank you for being here. For those of you that are catching us up on the recording, thank you for tuning in wherever you are. All right, let's start with a land acknowledgement. And as I have done in the last couple of sessions, I want to draw from the amazing resource, Braiding Sweetgrass. And this particular one is from the young adult version written by Robin Wall Kimmerer and adapted for youth by Monique Grace Smith. And the illustrations are by Nicole Neidhart. And I wanted to start us off today with this image that was taken right from the story about it's an origins retelling about the scientific and the wisdom that comes from the story of Sky Woman Falling. And this is a traditional story, a shared telling of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe story. And it talks about how we came to be here living on Turtle Island. And one of the most beautiful parts of this story, and I'm connecting this to our land acknowledgement today, is really thinking about how all of the parts of what are incorporated into this oral telling of the origin of our land is really important in the connections that we can make with students, and how we can show them that there is an Indigenous way of understanding the ways in which the world has come together. And we can also look at the scientific knowledge that has been adapted throughout this work. And so as we think about this, I want to encourage you to look at the Sky Woman Falling story and think about how you might integrate that into the work that you do with your students. Nicole Neidhart, who did the illustrations, she was quoted in this article about her work in this book. And something that she said really struck me. She said, "I hope the teachings of relationality come through for young readers. She wants them to understand that we are all in relation to one another and to our plant relatives, animal relatives, and to the land, the water, and the air. And with those relationships, there's a responsibility to care for them and to care for each other." I love when she says teachings that encompass relationality can change the way young adults or old adults not only think about themselves in the world, but also how they can move through the world. And so I want to think about this today, and we think about the relationships and think about how we move through the world and recognize here we are another week in, and our Alberta land is being ravaged by wildfires. And I really just want to take a moment to think about the people who are battling those fires, and those who are displaced from their homes, and all of the volunteers and people that are really working hard to try to create that and preserve that relationship that those people have with the land and their space. Today, I'm coming to you from the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, and the Eyaksi Nakota nations, and of course, Métis Nation number 3. And so thank you for thinking about that today, and I hope you'll see the connection through that relationship and the responsibilities as they go. If you have any comments or questions at any time, as always, please feel free to turn on your mics. Not so formal here. I'd love to hear you talk with me. Thank you for the hello. And And also to let you know that you can access today's slides here, the bit.ly link, I'm going to pop it into the chat for you, is a bit.ly make it real -K1 today. So here is the link to today's slides. And if you are catching us on the recording, you'll be able to see that in the chat as well. So I'll just give everyone a chance to get that for you, and you'll see how we're making all of these connections. So thank you. Make it real -K1. So while we're taking that chain and thinking about relationships, I really wanted to use this as the springboard from which we can discuss what it means to be transdisciplinary. Now, you've likely heard this word and you're thinking that we have a general sense of what it means. As educators, we know that it crosses curriculum, but I wanted to go in a little deeper about what that can look like and why I would approach this science curriculum in this way. And so you'll notice this garden and how it's all separated by neat and tidy rows into neat little lines and compartments. And Robin Wall-Kimmerer talks about in her book the relationship of plants and how they complement and support each other, and how they're not compartmentalized in real life in nature, but rather that they grow, and the relationships that they have with each other help to provide that structure and support for the whole ecosystem. So while we do this to our landscape and to our lives at times, sometimes we need a little bit more compartmentalization, but my things always bleed into each other and blend. What we've come to know is that life is most meaningful when we understand the relationships between those parts and how they work. Now you're wondering, why would I have an image of cake, carrot cake, let me be clear, on the next slide? And here's why. So let's go forth and think about how might we design learning for students so that they understand the complexity and the relationships that exist within their world. And it really is all about our design and the ways in which we approach learning. Do we segment it into tiny little rows or tiny blocks of time throughout the day? Sometimes, but sometimes we need to make those lines a little bit more blurry. Joe Bailey, who is a wonderful researcher and philosopher, has this model for describing what it means to be transdisciplinary. And I've captured her writing. You can see, hopefully you can make out the text all right on this particular slide. But what I want to show you is that she talks about the differences between disciplines and how we can use this food metaphor to really talk about how they might work together. And so I've included a link to her work if you'd like to go in and dig a little bit further. But she's also created this visual guide, and she calls it disciplinary recipes. So imagine for a minute that you have separate vegetables. Here she shows carrots, and those become a single ingredient or subject, and there's no mixing, right? It's just within one discipline. That's what that looks like. If you add in multiple disciplines, this then allows us to draw from more than one subject at a time. So we're viewing one discipline from the perspective of another. This means that we are cross-disciplinary. Okay, and it's like a load of ingredients on their own. And she describes it as a pretty dull meal. So just all of those vegetables kind of separate, but they're on the same plate. And so this makes our disciplinary work a little bit more cross-disciplinary. It goes beyond those initial boundaries. If we were to take those disciplines and chop them up and put them into a salad, the ingredients remain intact, and they're definitely distinguishable. Like, this is the math part, this is the science part, this is the ELAL part, and all of these are still visible in the salad. This would be multidisciplinary. Interdisciplinary takes us a little further, and we can look at a stew, and where the ingredients kind of mush into each other and they're only partially distinguishable. So this is an interesting way to think about how you could be really involved in a study of something and how we could work toward, sometimes students will say, oh, well, I didn't even know we were doing social studies, or I didn't even realize we were doing science, because it was all connected into that study. And finally, we have transdisciplinary. And the idea of this is that it's this unity of intellectual frameworks that all work together, and their parts are no longer distinguishable, but the final product becomes a different kind, which is the carrot cake, if you will. And so there's examples that I'll show you today, and we are working at a kindergarten and grade 1 level. We'll probably see examples that you might think are cross-disciplinary, or maybe it's a bit of a salad, including multidisciplinary, but we are trying to get students to see that everything is related and they're all connected together through that lens. Any comments or questions about this visual guide for what the differences between disciplines really look like? As elementary teachers, we really have the gift and the privilege, I think, of having the students for big blocks of time where we can mix in some of those disciplines. It definitely gets more challenging when you move into the middle or junior high and into high schools where the structures of the school day make it more challenging. It's not impossible. So now I want to take you to a different way. And you might be thinking, okay, I've done this before. I've definitely looked at a multidisciplinary way of doing this. The one distinction that I'd like to make is that what I hope to present today is different than a thematic approach. And I've pulled a couple of different pictures and images that maybe, in kindergarten or grade 1, you've done a theme that's around bears, or maybe something like, I've seen some fabulous, I taught a really engaging penguin unit one year when I taught grade 1. And so the difference here is that rather than going around a thematic topic, where you're doing you're reading books about bears and you're counting up bears for your math, you're researching the hibernation of bears and you're making bear art, all of these are engaging and students inevitably learn from them. Absolutely. So please understand that this is also a good way of doing things. But what I'm suggesting is a little bit different in that we're looking at the concepts to help make those transdisciplinary connections. Taylor asks a really good question about, could this be applied into a multi-grade setting? Yes, Taylor, absolutely. And I actually have a document that shows the concepts that go from grade to grade, so that it does help you to align those multi-grades, or if you're in a split, something like that. So I absolutely want to offer you additional support on that question. I'm going to bring you back to a slide that I introduced during part 1 of our series, and no problem if you haven't seen it. We were looking at this particular outcome right here on the bottom. It's a grade 1 outcome, and I know the text is small because I didn't want to cover this little guy's face, but students analyze environments and investigate interactions and changes. I'm going to focus on this particular learning outcome for our examples today, because I want to try to go a little deeper rather than doing surface examples that would leave you sort of wondering a little bit more. I chose this particular one, and I think that you'll agree. When you go into the New Learn Alberta and you take a look at the science outcomes in K-1, and I hope that you're using this digital version of it where you can actually line up the kindergarten outcomes right beside grade 1. If certainly you'll be doing that if you're in a split or a combined grade, but also it's really helpful as a grade 1 teacher to know what kinds of learning will they come forth with in the next few years as we start to really make this implementation more robust. The reason I chose these ones today, I'm going to just close up these ones and look at the Earth systems organizing idea. Here's the grade 1 outcome. Students analyze environments and investigate interactions and changes. The kindergarten outcome is children examine and describe surrounding environments. So both of them are going to include using your senses and taking a look at what are we noticing? How do we observe our surroundings? And we want to really get them to understand that. I'm also going to really focus on the concept of change and interaction. So there's where that relationship lies. And there's lots of different ways that you could do this. Oh, hi, Wanda. Thank you for posting that. That's awesome. And so I just wanted to bring your attention back to where I am with these two outcomes. And you can start this thinking by posing a question. Maybe it could be something like, how is time related to changes in our environment? And it might take a little while to unpack that big question. As teachers, we ask questions all day long, right? And some of them are bigger and they drive the learning in different ways besides where's your shoes and have you put your page on that pile over there. So let's just go back and forth and move into this idea a little bit. Okay, so again, I'm focusing on this one grade 1 outcome, but I hope you'll be able to see how the kindergarten outcomes can also be uncovered in this way. So in this big purple circle here, I've selected those key concepts that I really want to focus on for now. And there's definitely more concepts embedded. Change and interactions. And so then I started to think about what questions I could pose. How can we notice and learn about change? You can pose that as a question, or maybe it's a statement where we say something like interactions happen because the world is connected. And then you would have to unpack that a little bit because kindergartens might not have the vocabulary yet to think about interactions and connections, but they can learn them. And so I pulled out some other questions that you might, there's not one right answer for this, but how do we change over time might be a big question that you could ask. Or perhaps, how do we know that change is happening? Like, how can we use our scientific observations or our, how do we document what we're learning? How do we set up a bit of an experiment to find out what's happening? And what happens when changes occur? So this could be, they're open enough that you can really connect with different topics and different examples or case studies, if you will. So then you can see it's a little bit random. Don't worry for those of you that are more linear. I have something else that that will support you in this way. I would connect this to seasons in Alberta. Now I'm getting into the KUSPs that fall under this learning outcome. How can we notice and learn about change? Well, let's take a look at the seasons in Alberta and around the world. Let's observe, let's document, let's share, let's collect data and present it back. We definitely need to use our senses, which we may or may not have started in kindergarten. Remembering that kindergarten is not mandatory, we really want to make sure that we support that learning and don't make that assumption without double checking with all of the students. We could also look at animal migrations, their movement and their needs, which falls also under this learning outcome in the KUSPs, as well as some of the other components of the science curriculum. So when we think about change, we can see these connections in different ways. Growth and change over time. Maybe we really need to just understand change by thinking about how they have changed. We know that developmentally, children of this age really start with who they are and what's happening to them. So maybe they bring in a picture of them when they were babies and they start to talk about what's changed or what they can do now that they couldn't do then. We could also start to think about this green idea here. And now this is where our Indigenous ways of knowing come in, and also where we think about our role in this and the interactions that we have. So we are connected, so we need to look after each other. And we think then about cause and effect, right? So if the rain comes out, that would be the cause of me pulling out an umbrella. So that's something that, an example. But I put in this thought bubble because I'm thinking, wait a second, I'm looking at this and seasons. This might not be like a 3-week unit, but rather something that I include as part of our practice throughout the year. So we can really document and change things and see that change happen. And that's okay to do in terms of your planning. Wanda, anything I should stop and pause and answer in the chat?
I think the question maybe relates to that document you have, Cheryl. Jennifer had a great question about a place to access some ideas around those big questions as a starting place.
Yeah. So definitely I will pull up the concept document, but I think that there's a couple ways that I come to think about these questions. Sometimes I look at something that's really open-ended and there's a lot of possibilities. But sometimes those kinds of questions, sometimes you hear them as thick or thin questions. Is it something you can just Google or get an answer? But we also need those examples, those facts to make sense of a big question. So sometimes I also look at opinion questions. I learned a lot about those types of questions from Garfield Jenny Newman from the Critical Thinking Consortium. He might have a question like, what is the very best season to live in Calgary? And that could be your question. And you might think, well, how do we do that? But what happens is, as you're learning and documenting and capturing all of the evidence of what happens in all of these seasons, students have to have an opinion, and they need to like pull out some evidence to back it up. And so that's a really great critical thinking opportunity. So these types of questions are really great to do with a buddy, and some of the concepts that we'll take a look at can help you get there. I promise to come back to that again. I also was playing with this web and thinking, I just need to get out my notebook. And so I'm kind of a web thinker, and you can see that this one's a little bit messy, but I was thinking about the concept of change and then how might this embed into some of these aspects. So I was thinking about changes in people and animals and the seasons. Through math, I'm thinking, okay, if we see changes in the seasons, we might be able to track hours of sunshine or daylight patterns that we see over time. We could use images and icons to make graphs. I remember very distinctly a grade 1 student who was not ready to start his day until he checked the phone and the weather app to see and report out to the rest of the students the actual temperature and the feels like temperature. And once that was done, he was ready to go. And so those are kinds of the different kinds of data that can be collected and really help students to understand that it's all being put together. And then you can see how we can tie it in with literature or using their senses and using thinking routines. I'm thinking a poem each day to talk about those feelings, a mixture of fiction and nonfiction and graphic novels, beautiful music and movement and dances and feelings and the changes of all of those things, but really thinking about the cause and effect. So when this happens, then this will occur, or if this, then this. Those are other things. And then I couldn't help but think about the competencies, which we've talked about a little bit. Through all of these experiences, you're developing communication skills and observation skills. We want students to develop clever questioning strategies that not only help them to uncover what they want, but also to help them see the relationships between things. So remember the other day when we talked about how you might unpack one word in different ways by building a working bulletin board to give them examples, or that they could bring in examples and non-examples perhaps of some of these words. But we could also draw on the work of Julie Stern, who wrote Tools for Teaching, Conceptual Understanding. And one of the things that she does when you're thinking of questions, I'm going to come back to Taylor, is what is the relationship between a concept and a concept? So imagine this. What is the relationship between seasons and change? What happens? We have to change your clothes. You have to change your tires. You have to change your holiday plans, whatever it might be. Or how does time impact the weather, or what effect does the season changes have on animals? And so these question frames can also help you to create and tweak and play with some of those questions. Now, this is a lot of text on this screen. I even went beyond the boundaries of the slide. I wanted to show it to you all at once intentionally. I usually like reveal things a little bit at a time, but I wanted to show you that when planning this way, it doesn't always need to look like a messy web, but it can. It does need to sort of target the goals, that backward design and planning. And so this is meant to be, I'm just starting up here, an incomplete planning map. Thinking about a summative assessment triangle at the end. So knowing that we need to be able to assess a learning outcome and the degree to which a child has reached that outcome. But we all know that we want to be assessed by multiple ways. No one wants to be judged by one quick snapshot, but rather a photo album of evidence. So if you think about designing your learning experiences through that assessment lens, and whether you choose a big question, such as how can we notice and learn about change, or interactions happen between things that are connected, I think there's no like rule that says you have to use a question or you have to use a statement. You need to make this work for you. And so what I've done here is I've tried to create a summative assessment triangle that will reveal students' understanding of those cusps in a few different ways. Knowing that when we look through the cusps on New Learn Alberta, so for example, if we go right into here and we see the 4 seasons, we've got some places on the earth have 2 seasons. We've got seasonal changes discussing how the changes appear in environments and how that relates to the plants and animals. So the understanding is really about changes in environments, include seasonal changes. Then we can think about migration and hibernation. There's lots of facts and skills that are really essential into unpacking and understanding that learner outcome. So here's where you can start to think about, I'm looking at this yellow arrow on the left-hand side now, thinking of the best way that students can reveal to you what they know, understand, and can do. So it's easy for us to come up with activities. Teachers are the best activity designers ever, right? But thinking about a really great learning experience that can also tell you what they know and understand. And so I've included a few different examples that pull from some of these different subject areas and disciplines. And I hope you'll see how they can all weave together to help answer a bigger question, where students are going to be able to create and share a story about change. Now you'll notice that I didn't say write a story for kindergarten and grade 1. Maybe they do, or maybe it's a story that they tell orally, or maybe it's a story that they act out using materials. Maybe there's also a chance in that triangulation of data that students will respond to questions about how we notice and learn about change. And maybe you'll also observe them while engaged in a variety of experiences that reveal relationships between the parts. So I hope you'll see that my target is to try to get them to see all of those big things as a way of understanding and demonstrating that, that understanding and transfer of that learner outcome. So without reading this whole slide to you, you'll see that I suggest adopting a tree or a sit spot, a place where they can revisit each month. And you're talking about drawing and noticing and using their senses. You will do that work to unpack the concept of change like we did in the earlier lesson. Maybe capturing video evidence where your students are asked, how do our senses help us understand our environment? What about animals? And how is that the same or different? Using a wonder walk or calendar math to do some of those things, including seasonal art and the concept of if this, then this, I change it too, always caring, never change. So I tried to reveal that web into a little bit more structure for you here, and really trying to think about the most powerful ways that students can show what they know through a variety of curricula. The next few slides I want to show you are how you can integrate literature and some of those ideas together, so that we can really see the transdisciplinary approach where we don't always necessarily see the difference between which subject we're in, but we're always working toward all of those learner outcomes goals. This particular book, A Stone Sat Still, by Brendan Wenzel. And I just want to play a tiny little clip of it for you so that you can see that this stone goes through lots of changes, or does it? And so the way that it links to our question.
Hello, friends. Welcome to Story Time. This week we are reading A Stone Sat Still by Brendan Wenzel. During the story, it seems that the stone goes through lots of changes. But does it? What does change? What do you think? We will find out. Enjoy. As it was, where it was in the world.
It's very poetic. It's very, illustrations are strong.
And the stone was bright. And the stone was loud. And the stone was quiet.
So I don't want to spoil it. That would be rude of me. But I do want you to use this reference if you like it. It's a fantastic book that you can introduce tomorrow if you need something, but also can link into the changes that happen and how the world moves around and what are the animals doing and the plants doing and all around it. So this could really be something, if you adopt a sit spot, how does that spot change over time? So that's just a little idea that I hope you'll like. I know, such a teaser. This book here is called Wonder Walk, and it's a beautiful story that really models how to practice listening in quiet moments. And you can think about the wellness connections that you can do, stopping to draw and notice and wonder. And to, I asked you this question the other day, but how many I wonders do you have? And so you could get them to really focus on using their senses and noticing the beauty. This book is by Karen Weston, and it's called Wonder Walk.
Wonder Walkers by Micah Archer.
Anyone seen this one before? Just going to skip.
Wonder Walk? Sure.
So they start to go out and they start to notice and they start to ask questions.
Do mountains have bones? Are forests the mountain's fur? I wonder. Me too.
Their questions can really show those relationships between plants and animals. Do the mountains have bones? Like thinking about the structure and the connections and what is the land made of and how is that similar or different? And you can just see through that conceptual lens the power that this could have. The next one I'm showing you, because I know that you have lots of time, and I just wanted to keep that part totally secret, of course. This one you're going to love as well. It's called Outside In, and it's all about how we used to be outside all of the time, and now much of what we do is done inside. And this one leads to a YouTube link that you can use as well. What happens to your senses and your feelings? Do they change when you go outside or inside? And so this one's a beautiful, and the illustrations and the art are also fantastic. So I hope you love that one. When we think about learning experiences that could be driven through the concept of change, you can see that there are so many different ways. But one thing I really want to point out to you is that we are not intending to water down the specific aspects of each discipline. So for example, we are not ignoring the development of letter sounds and letters when we do a transdisciplinary approach. We are still learning all of those important components. We're learning about the phonological awareness. We're developing all of the vocabulary. We're doing those things simultaneously and in a connected way. We're learning about the colors and how we can create change in art. What happens if we change the letters and the pattern of those letters? What does that do to the word? And so I hope that you'll see through each discipline, we are still maintaining the integrity of what happens in that subject, but also looking for those really authentic and important connections. One of the things that I will always and forevermore be an advocate of is the idea of journaling and getting outside, particularly for your young students. Be a model. They want to see you do it too. Figure out like hard surfaces, clipboards, or hard-backed journals. Dollarama has these ones this size they're on a coil. They're like, $1.50 or something. So whatever you can do to model and draw what you see and use your senses and adding details. And so there's Claire Leslie Walker is a beautiful model for this. She has a couple of different books, and I aspire to be able to draw and paint this well. But these are the kinds of inspirations that you can share with kids and show them that you are willing to give it a try. While you're thinking about being outside for this particular one that's about environments, it's not always outside environments, but also looking at our indoor environments. You could be thinking about the authentic math links, like counting collections and tracking data. And you can see, I've pulled the learning outcomes so that you can see that this is not just a superficial link, but it's actually understanding and developing that work and that learning at the same time. And so you could be out counting and tracking footprints or found objects outside, or looking to create weather graphs or temperature graphs and those types of things that we talked about. Many of you have probably seen the over and under series. My goodness, they're amazing. And so beautifully done. This particular video the storyteller is amazing. It's a little bit long, so you'll want to preview it before you just push start, because he has quite a lengthy intro. But if you think about the concept of migration or hibernation, looking at seasonal changes and what happens in different parts and what we can see and what we know, they're stunning. So check them out. I also wanted you to see that we've done some sessions. My partner, Kim Tackberry, worked on a couple of sessions where they were infusing Indigenous ways of knowing and literature with literacy skills and numeracy skills. And I think Wanda's done some of this work as well. But if you think about introducing multiple perspectives and how you're exploring and listening, developing speaking skills through the ways in which you interact with books. And, here's a sample that you could look at, pulling key sentences out of a mentor text and then connecting it to the senses and how they're exploring their environment. So there's a lot of strength and possibility in how you might web out and think about some of these examples. Sweetest Kulu is a wonderful picture book that will really make a good connection to a lens of belonging and welcoming as sacred teachings from that Indigenous perspective. So students are creating messages through the writing process, and you can think about relationships and how those things are connected. And what happens if a relationship changes, or what happens as someone grows and changes. So you can really focus on a lot of these different pieces while still maintaining focus and that assurance that you're developing the skills and dispositions that students need to be successful in each discipline individually. So now, in the last couple of minutes, I just wanted to talk for a minute about planning and assessment and how you can streamline this. So let's use this bouquet of flowers as a metaphor. And I want you to think about how you might create an engaging and efficient task, or one task that might have multiple parts, right? So coming back to the assessment map, where I said students will create a story that tells about a change to a person or an animal over time. And the story can be communicated through various materials, drawings, words, or through oral telling. And so with this in mind, let's just say that this pink rose represents the science outcomes. And so I've pulled that one here for us. These white roses, or whatever they are, I think they're roses, they represent the ELAL outcomes. And you can see that we've got students examining messages and developing listening and speaking skills. They're creating messages through their own writing process. So while uncovering this science outcome, they're also given the opportunity to really emphasize and focus on their ELAL outcomes as well. We can continue this, and you can pull out from this plant up here, and you can see that I pulled from the current art program of studies because we don't have the new one is just in draft form still. And so the students will learn the shapes of things as well as develop decorative styles. So that can be done all in the context of this work. And then the math learning outcome, students explain time in relation to cycles. And so thinking about the seasons and the calendar and those different pieces. And when you pull all of those together, you can see that they would be developing the competencies. And so I just wanted to take that bouquet back and show you that through these types of experiences, we're hoping to develop critical thinking, problem solving, managing information, demonstrating creativity, and all of the others. I don't mean to read this to you, but when you do have a copy of the slides, you can click into this link here and remember that on the New Learn Alberta site, when you go back to this main page here, you can go into the competency progressions. And through this area here, you can take a look at the competencies, and there's I statements, I wonder, I think, I make, or I reflect, and they go from, different stages based, kindergarten ages 4 to 5 through division 1 and through 2. For each of those competencies, there's language and statements that you can use to help students know what the goal is. What's the target? Oh, I really need to be able to collect information for a specific audience or purpose. I'm going to collect evidence about why spring is the best season in Calgary, or whatever it is you want them to do. Okay, so remember that the competencies are here to help you and support you in your learning. And when you get right down into it, I also wanted to make to really show clarity that when you are looking into the cusps, whichever cusp it might be, if you hover over the green learner outcome onto this eye, you get this flyout, right? And so if we're looking at properties of objects and investigating how they can be changed, there's that concept of change again. Each of these cusps are sectioned off into a bit of a cluster, and those can be tied together. And so it is important that we continue to draw on these, because these are intended to all be addressed in some way, and you get to decide how you're going to put that carrot cake together. Hopefully you're not just tuning in and wondering what I'm talking about with a carrot cake. So a tool that we have found to be quite useful comes from Damien Cooper and Jeff Catania's rebooting assessment from 2022. This is an amazing resource because it really focuses on how do we capture all of this different kind of evidence? How do we capture observations that we're making, or how do we document conversations that we hear, and so that we know that that all contributes to that triangle or that triangulation of assessment data. This document is called Look Fors, and this one here is, there's 2 parts or 2 different versions. And what you can do, because in kindergarten and grade 1 and every grade really, there's so many things happening in a classroom at the same time. And sometimes we forget exactly what it is we're looking for. So you can give yourself a couple of quick questions or prompts. I'm looking for evidence of understanding of the seasons, or like, let's take a look at back to this cusp here. I know the number of KUSPs are there, but I think when you start to see how they can come together, or you see them in different ways, it will be easier to kind of plan out. And remember that you get to decide how much time and how much emphasis you place on each of these. And you do not need to do a summative assessment for every single KUSP, but rather you're documenting and watching and calculating and tracking some of those things in order to create some sort of a summative assessment that assesses the overall learner outcome, right? So when you see these KUSPs, so I'm just going to go back to the Earth Systems one so we can think about this learning outcome here for the one we're talking about. Animals are usually able to move from place to place. Well, how does that work, and how does that connect to the living systems that we were talking about? Okay, I'm scrolling too much. I'm getting off track. This particular look for is also super helpful. Like, let's say that you are getting students to subitize numbers in kindergarten, and that you're trying to really track what that where they're at with a specific skill. You can record that skill on a little slip of paper, and then you're dropping initials. Not yet, needs a little help, independently. Like, not everything needs to be assessed on a level of achievement, or because they don't always have that depth. Sometimes it's just, it's right or it's wrong. And so, or not quite yet, I shouldn't say wrong. It's right or it's still working on it, not yet. Wanda, you're making a really good point about the curriculum implementation will take a while. It does not all have to be ready to go by September the 1st. Start building and start designing little bits at a time, and know that whenever you're meeting the needs of your students, you're doing the right thing for them. These tools we hope will help. Here's an example of a video that's an audio recording, actually, that captures what's happening in the brain of a grade. This is a kindergarten student who had drawn a picture in response to Arnie the Donut picture book. This one's not about our particular lesson around change or the concept of that, but I just wanted to give you a chance to listen to this so that we can think about, when we hear something, how do we document that evidence of learning, and what do we still need to do? I'm mindful of time, and we're almost there. Okay, responses to Arnie the Donut.
Mr. Green, my story is about a pillow in a log in a timbit when they're alive. Now I'm gonna start the story. Once there was a timbit in a log in a pillow. They went for a walk, and they went over a frosty mountain and back to the park where they usually go to play. But when they came down the slide, they saw people who wanted to take them home. And then the people took them home. And
too cute, right? And always just knowing that as they're capturing, if you can use sound recordings or little videos, maybe it's My Blueprint or Seesaw or something like that to help you capture some of that evidence. I do also love the puddle analogy. I want to share with you one other template that I hope you'll find useful. We've called this Who Needs What? And the idea is that it's not meant to be a perfectly planned, amazing piece, but rather a tool that can help you keep track of where students are and help you to plan forward with the ideas. So let's say you're building, I'm going to just go right to this example here. This is a grade 3 example that I hope you'll be able to transfer into your own K1 context. So the target in this example is the idea of examining circular plot structures found in fictional texts. So this is a right out, that those circle stories that like Three Little Pigs or Stephanie's Ponytail. And so these are some things that you might have ideas in your head for how to really build that together. Circular plot structures can be, you can look at the changes or the patterns that are transcending into some of the science outcomes. The way this tool works is that you jot down initials in this column to indicate students who need a little bit more time or need some feedback, and then you decide what might help them. These students here need a new angle tomorrow during literacy centers. I'm going to read the mitten to them. And these particular students here need something different. So you can link, the link to this template is actually here. So you can play with that if you're looking for another way to help you capture. So now I just want to pause and let you know that I'm open to questions. How many I wonders do you have today after this session? Feel free to turn on your mics or use the chat. Yes, I will put the link to the multi-grade resource for you. And as you are getting ready to leave, please watch our CRC newsletter if you're not already subscribed. This particular list, if you click on this link, it will take you to last year's CRC summer reading list, where we had two teacher librarians, sorry, not principals, fabulous teacher librarians collate the best and brightest summer reads, all of different levels and different types of books. So I wanted to throw that one in for you and let you know that this year's is coming up very soon as well. And so with all of these things in mind, I just want to share that I'm very grateful for you to join us. Let us know how this series and this session were for you. Your feedback is really important to us. So there will be a survey sent out to you. If you could please spend 2 minutes and just, tell us what worked, what didn't work for you. That feedback we use every day to try to improve our own practice and the ways in which we can reach out to help you. So also let me know in the chat or however you want how you felt about the session. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Wanda Decken, for being here with us tonight. And there's links to our email and my teammates as well. And I just wanted to say thank you for being here. Have a good night, everyone.